there, this is Jenna Soard from youcanbrand.com. Today we're going to get into how to design like a pro even if you aren't. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So why are you here today? Well, my guess is that perhaps you've done some of your own design work before and things look a little bit off. Maybe things don't look as professional as you want them to, and you want to know why. Perhaps you have experienced a certain amount of shame with your design work for your business. Let's say you've gone to a networking event with a business card and you've said, hey, don't go to my website. It's not finished yet. Or I have somebody working on a logo for me, or my branding's not finished. Having design shame is a really common thing with new business owners. You also might really want to get empowered to design like a professional. So that makes perfect sense to why you would be here for today's lesson as well. So I'm very excited to get into what we're going to learn today, which is the next topic. Why do some designs fail? Let's definitely get to the bottom of that, and how to make things look more professional. We're going to use some design principles to get to the bottom of that. And then last but not least, we're going to have a review with a checklist for great design that covers most of what we've learned here today and other important factors. So a little bit about me. Yes, that's me sitting on top of a plane looking like Amelia Earhart. My company is youcanbrand.com, and I have a program called Launch Your Brand. I teach entrepreneurs who've never designed before how to design their very own logo, business card, and website in a very short period of time. And it has been my burning passion and desire to teach people who've never designed before how to design like professionals. I taught at the University of Oregon for 4 years, along with the Forbes School of Business. I did branding, entrepreneurship, and design classes. I was a senior designer for Nike. And so I have a ton of experience in this whole design and branding thing. I'm really excited to share some of this great knowledge with you. So way back when I first started teaching, I collected this as an example of bad design with the permission of the student, of course, about what it takes to have bad design. And this particular student, this was a first assignment that he had submitted, and he fell into so many funny bad design traps here. So, and bless his little heart. So the first thing is that we could say that the concept of this piece is fresh air. Now we say it's the concept because that is the message that's being communicated. We could even go as far to say as bringing you a cool breeze really feeds into that concept even more. But for some reason, even though this is supposed to be an air conditioning company that you want to be communicating this cool breeze through the design elements, he chose the color green. And he probably did this because he thought green was a great color and he loved it and he wanted to use it in a design. But as you can see here, it really doesn't communicate the idea of refreshing, but instead probably like stinky or something. So in addition to that, if you can also think of like what a air conditioning company would want to communicate, they probably would want to communicate modern and up to date. And he chose fonts that look like they would come from a medieval fair. So we can see here that the fresh air is probably, and I'm guessing that this is probably like Chancellor or some font that was free on his computer, which is a really common mistake with new designers. And was just choosing something that he thought looked cool, even though is completely communicating the wrong adjectives for this brand. In addition to that, as you can see, he tried to have fun by being creative by typing words on a line. This is another mistake we see all the time with new designers. They're trying to be creative and make things look cool. And instead, what this actually does is it completely degrades the integrity of the font. So this is a big no-no in graphic design. It seems like they're having fun, but in actuality, it's really doing some things that are making this design look campy and unprofessional. So in addition to that, we can also see this last thing about this design. In most of these examples, you can see that there is text that is hugging the edge of the design work. Now this definitely ends up communicating an idea of cramped and, unintentionally placed items. Like we can see the phone number in the lower right-hand corner of the second example, completely pushed up against the side of the design, or the logo and tagline completely pushed up against the design. And so all good design work needs to have a margin. There can be images that bleed off the side of something and that can look cool. But when it comes to text, it really should never hug the edge. There should always be consistent margins around all sides, consistent margins between things, unless you're doing something very intentionally. So it's very, very common new designer problems. So as we take a look here, this is the same student's design work, not even a few weeks later after working with some of the design principles and the techniques that I taught him. And so what's so cool about this is that I ended up getting the students a paying client for the course so they could design for a real world example. And we went and met with this particular bar and restaurant. And so his designs were chosen and he ended up becoming the paid designer for this project, even though he was producing work that was not that great before. So the idea to think here is that everybody's capable of doing this. It's just really about learning about what makes good design, studying that, and following some very simple rules, which is what we're going to get into here. So this was a huge light bulb moment for me that I want to help people know as much about design and making things look professional as possible. And so I really started to test and understand and dissect and deconstruct and reconstruct what makes for good professional design. So what makes for good design? And that we can start with the first design principle of contrast. So one of the rules about contrast is that you want to make two things very different. And we're going to look at a wide variety of examples of how to do this. Without contrast, designs are boring. So contrast is probably one of the most important design principles to follow. And without contrast, designs are hard to read. Just to give you a quick example, if I had decided to create the headline and the copy for this slide to be in black, we would not have a contrast to be able to read this. So having contrast with everything from saturation of color to, even looking here with the headline being quite a bit bigger and bolder than the copy below it, that contrast of size from big to small makes things more readable, makes things more interesting, and it is an incredibly important part of design. Now, doing just those couple of things is not just the only way to use contrast in design, but we can also see here in the upper left-hand corner, Stutterheim is much bigger than the small little tagline below it. This is actually the same font for the upper Stutterheim name and the raincoats below that, but we almost don't even know that because the size difference makes things look so incredibly different. The second example of contrast that we can see here at the bottom is this contrast of direction. So it's very interesting to see something like a script font tilted and see the actual juxtaposition between the copy text below. So this is a great example. We're going to see actually some other examples of how direction can be used to make designs more interesting. On the right-hand side, we can see where it says all in generalizations. That actually is showing a contrast of style. So we can see that the contrast of the script font with the sans serif font is actually creating the contrast principle with contrasting style. In the upper right-hand corner, we can see a contrast of color and saturation. Now notice here that the title of Rockstar is popping off the page because the white is so different. Saturation compared to the colors behind it. And this is a really great example of using color and saturation to create contrast as well. So the next thing we're going to talk about is grids and alignment. And this is super important that everything should have a relationship to something else on the page. So nothing should be placed without intention or laid out randomly. This really prevents messy designs. And we can see in the bottom right-hand corner, we can see an example of what it means to align things on a horizontal and vertical. This is really important for making things look very organized. And what you'll start to notice as you analyze graphic design is a good graphic designer will have every single thing have a relationship to something else on the page. So this is a really great example of grid design. As we can see at the bottom, I don't know if you can see the little rectangle with the smiley face, and then on the far right-hand corner, the anchor. And so because of how the boxes, the height of them, the width of them, because we can see the height and the width are the same, that there is an invisible grid line that creates a direct relationship between that box with the box on the right. And we see this throughout the design, how there are these relationships being created by using invisible grid lines to create that relationship. And this is super clear in this particular design, but in other designs, you're going to have to actually imagine how those lines are being created. I use this as an example so you can actually see the lines a little bit better because they're using boxes to align things. But even if the boxes weren't here, showing these sorts of relationships from the top of the design down to the bottom of the design makes things feel very cohesive, organized, and easy to navigate. So one of the last of the design principles we're going to cover is to group similar things together. Grouping should happen to allow the audience to easily get through a piece. So we can notice here that, and one of the design principles we're not really going to get into today is visual hierarchy. But as we can see, because Jazz Festival is the biggest thing on the page, that is the first thing that we see. So we can assume that the Jazz Festival, which could be the we could replace this with like the title of a band or something like that, that is the most important message that's being communicated here. Now we see that live music and theater hall are close to Jazz Festival because that's related, similar information, and it makes logical sense for it to be grouped together. If you can see where it says featuring and how there is space around the blues quartet, alley, brass, and blues strings that are all closely grouped together, there's space all around that to show a distinct relationship with things that are similar. So the idea here is that we want to use headlines as a way to let the audience understand what each group of information is about. Also, we want to group things that are similar together because it helps organize information on the page. It allows the audience to be able to easily navigate throughout without being overwhelmed or having any misunderstandings. It also just prevents messy designs. And I don't know if you remember from a few minutes ago when we were talking about contrast, we can see here that there's a really beautiful contrast of saturation happening here, of size, and of direction. So this is a really great example of a great use of contrast in design work. So I don't know if you've guessed, but this would be an example of bad design. This is a website that no longer exists anymore. I found this on the website webpages.suck.com. It's so funny because way back when I was in college, I think they used the same example as an example of bad design. So part of what makes this particular design look so bad is because it's dated and because there's no use of margins or of using contrast with headlines, or that sort of the idea of the way that things are being grouped here is just not very clear because the headlines are not separate from the copy and are not bigger than the copy. So we look at these groups of information and it's really difficult to find out what each group of information is about. So I think this is a really good example of bad grouping. It's kind of grouped by frames, but it really relies on those headlines to show what the different groups of information are about. The last design principle that we're going to cover, which is repetition. So as you can see with this particular company called Hone by Redcroft, you can see that their little apple or whatever this Japanimation style fruit is actually making an appearance of repetition throughout everything from their letterhead through their product labeling through their promotional materials. So this is a really good example of brand identity. The colors and shapes and lines and image style is pretty consistent throughout all of their marketing materials, which is really good branding and very good design. From a repetition perspective, what's cool about seeing the same sort of shape throughout these different pieces is we can also see some of the differences between the pieces as well. With the orange juice, green tea, strawberry lemonade, and cranberry apple, the different colors and the slightly different fonts on those products would be considered more of a sub-brand. So they're going to have their own little brand identity. But we still have that repetition of the line style, even though they're completely different colors, because of the line style and the reuse of the images repeating throughout, that is developing a direct relationship between the products, even if they're not using the same colors and fonts. So this should give you some great ideas of how to use repetition in your own design work. And let's go ahead and dive into a summary of what we've learned today and the top 10 things you should know for great design. So the first one is that everything should be placed with intention. Nothing is randomly placed on the page. This is very important. You want to use contrast to make things more interesting in direction, size, style, and saturation. You want to use grid and alignment to have every item in the design have a relationship. You want to use repetition to have things feel more cohesive, as we just saw with the last brand, to really create a relationship between different items. We want to group similar items together with headlines. This helps the audience scan for information. There's another term for this called visual chunking, and you want to be able to make it as easy for your audience as possible to get through the information that they need because their attention spans are so limited. We also want to say that typography is consistent and uses repetition. This comes also with the headline things. We want to have the same font for H1s throughout an entire piece, whether it's a website or a brochure or anything, in the same font, size, and color. So you can have headline 1, headline 2, headline 3. They should each be different in size, headline 1 being the biggest down to headline 3 being the smallest, and used consistently throughout the piece so that you're really creating a visual language. That's going to really help make things feel more cohesive. Number 7 being margins are used consistently. We saw some really great examples of how a text hugging the edge of something looks terribly sloppy. And something that we didn't cover today, but I think this is really important. When you are not a professional designer, and even if you are a professional designer, I'm a firm believer in there's an amazing book that was written that was called Steal Like an Artist, to really think about how you can take beautiful design that's already out there and go in and create your own version. This means that you can get inspired by color schemes or by font combinations or by layout, and you can go in and really analyze what you like about different designs and then piece those things together. So of course, one of the things from the book Steal Like an Artist was that if you borrow from one resource, that's considered plagiarism. But if you borrow from many resources, that's considered research. And so that's totally true for getting inspired by great design. You really should do what we like to call deconstruction, reconstruction, which is taking these design principles, figuring out what you like about something, and then reusing them in your own work. And this is the number one secret I can say in how to make designs look professional without you having to be creative. Because remember, we saw that from the original student. What happens when you try to be creative? Things just start to look crazy. So number 9, this is really important. Whatever your design ends up being, you really want to make sure that the colors and the font choices and the imagery really represents the brand personality, the brand adjectives, industry, and style. We saw that example with the air conditioning, about how he really didn't follow that idea of air conditioning company wants to be modern, and he's using a font that's medieval, or green instead of something that would be refreshing. So again, this all comes back down to, are you designing with intention? Can you justify these decisions that you're making? And number 10, this is the most important thing. Once you get done with that design, you really want to test it with your target market to see what the reaction is. And focus groups and surveys can be really important for making sure that you're designing the best possible things for your business. Again, I am Jenna Soard with youcanbrand.com. I've really enjoyed our time together today, and I hope that we get to know each other a little bit better. Please come on over to my site or Facebook page. My site is at youcanbrand.com. You can go to facebook.com/youcanbrand or instagram.com/youcanbrand. Keep in touch and come over and get some more free training from me. I would love to help you out. All right, take care and have a great day.